We're going to approach things maybe a little different tonight. In Ephesians 2:10, for we are his workmanship, created in Mashiach, Yeshua, for good works, which Yahweh prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. That scripture says so much that I don't know how we just breeze through it and don't pick up what it says. We, you and me, are his workmanship, created in Mashiach Yeshua for good works. Now, if we claim to be in Yeshua, and we are yet walking in sin, are we not blaspheming against Yahweh? Because he said he has created us good works. And if we are his work, created for good works, and we're doing evil works, they're accrediting the evil works to him. We need to understand that there is a basic principle here with the Torah. It is the preparation that Almighty Yahweh has given us. We are entering into, well, we're not entering into it, we've been in it for years, a battle. We're in a battle with the evil ones of this world. We're in a battle with all the demons of this world. And they are plenty educated in how to tempt, how to distract you, how to get you defocused. They are plenty experted, educated in that field. They know how to tempt you. They know where your weaknesses are. And they will not fail to hit you in your weakness. That's why we have to prepare. Look at ourselves closely and see where the weaknesses is in our walk. If we have weaknesses in our walk, we need to reinforce them. If you were a soldier in a battle and you had built up a barricade, enforcement, you would know that your life depended on the fact that that enforcement held up, that it would not break down. And you would diligently look for the weak spots in that enforcement, wouldn't you? Why? Because you know the enemy is going to be looking for the weak spots in that enforcement where he can break through. If we are smart, we look at our life and examine our life for the weaknesses that's in the enforcement. Because the Ruach HaKodesh and Almighty Yahweh, he is our protection, he is our fortress, he is our strength, he is our shield. And we need to examine ourselves for the weaknesses that are there. The Torah is our basic training manual. That trains us for the battle that we're going to. In a real army, nobody takes just a raw green recruit and throws him out in the middle of a heated battle because he's not going to be able to stand up. He has to go through training. He has to be trained for the battle that he's going to be in. You, my friend, have to be trained for the battle that you're going to be in. Your battle most of the time will not be a physical battle, but it will be a spiritual, mental battle. Satan is going to try to control you with your carnal mind. That is the area that he can enter into. He can't enter into the Ruach HaKodesh, but he can enter into your carnal mind. And your carnal mind is at enmity with Almighty Yahweh. It is against the ways of Almighty Yahweh. When you start trying to reason things out and figure them out in your mind, you have already put yourself in trouble. The Word is spiritually discerned. It has to be spiritually revealed to you. I mean, you can read it and understand a shallow understanding of it maybe. But if you don't have the Ruach HaKodesh working in you and ministering to you through all of that, you're going to miss the meat of the Word. You're going to just get the top crust and you're going to miss the meat of the Word. We have been prepared beforehand. That is the Torah. That's our basic training manual. If we ignore that, then we do not know how to fight the battles that we have to fight. If you aren't prepared in the Torah, if you aren't walking in righteousness, if you aren't walking in obedience to Almighty Yahweh, then you are not prepared. You are not prepared. You're going out in the field of combat unprepared. And you're not going to make it. You are not going to make it. I can tell you tonight, you're not going to make it. If you aren't prepared, if you haven't prepared yourself with the Torah, if you aren't walking in the commandments, in the Torah, as you were instructed in the basic training of the Word, you're not going to make it. The Father said, if you regard iniquity in your heart, I will hide my face from you. What a serious scripture that every one of us should have embranded in our brain. It should be embranded in our brain. If we regard sin or iniquity in our heart, if we regard something that is contrary to the Word of Yahweh in our heart, Almighty Yahweh hides His face from us. Now, how many of us want to go through a day with the Father not focused on us and preparing our well-being for us? We pray this blessing, this Mosaic blessing over the congregation every time we come together. Father, bless us this day and keep us. That don't mean not throw us away. That means keep us protected. Keep us walking in righteousness. Keep us walking in His protection. It is so important that we know that our protection is in Almighty Yahweh. Make your face shine upon us, Father. And making His face shine means to look at us with joy and happiness, like a smile. It indicates a smile on our face. Look at us, lift up your countenance upon us and give us your shalom. Give us your peace. We need to understand that we every day of our life should be preparing for the battles that we were in. We were created to worship Yahweh and to have fellowship with Him. But yet we can't do it if we regard iniquity in our heart. The Father had given Adam and Eve such a protection. They weren't aware of evil. They did not have to make a choice. Disobeying Almighty Yahweh never came to their mind. until the devil came on the scene. They had never had a thought of disobeying Almighty Yahweh. They had never had a thought that Almighty Yahweh did not want them to be like him, and he was trying to hold them down and keep them from being promoted. They never had those thoughts until Satan came around. He said, whoa, if I eat of this fruit, I'm going to be like Yah. And she was tempted. And she gave in to that temptation. She was deceived. But her husband was not deceived. He intentionally disobeyed Almighty Yahweh. He was not deceived. He willingly and intentionally disobeyed Yahweh because his wife enticed him. He was more endeared to his wife than he was Almighty Yahweh. That's a warning to us, people. We need to be in a place where we keep our priorities in the right place. And I'm not talking about anything about divorces and separation and all that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about being in a tune with Almighty Yahweh and refusing to disobey him. It is so strong, and the consequences are so great. The trick that Satan used on Eve was to get her to doubt the intentions and the motives of Yah, and he's still using the same tactics today. Go with me to Genesis 3:6. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and the tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. Adam and Eve, like Esau, gave up paradise that they lived in for the food, the delicacy. I wonder how many of us today are giving up our walk with Almighty Yahweh and our peace because of the delicacies of this world. It is urgent that we, by our actions, cause Almighty Yahweh to know that we love him with all of our heart, all of our mind, and all of our soul. And loving him don't mean being gushy, emotional, and all that stuff. Loving him is defined in the Word by obeying his commandments and keeping his statutes. When you obey his commandments and keep his statute, you are showing him love. When you refuse to walk and keep his commandments and obey his statutes, you are not rejecting those statutes, you're rejecting him. And you are testifying to him that you are not concerned with him. And I want you to look, I personally believe, all right, and I'm going to give you some evidence here, the reason I believe it. I personally believe that Adam and Eve, up until the time they took of the fruit, did not see visually with their eyes. They only perceived, and they walked so close to Almighty Yahweh that they was guided and directed by Almighty Yahweh, and revelation guided them through the day, through the night. And you say, well, what about when she saw that it was good to, good to eat? It was, Beautiful. The Hebrew word is ra'ah, a primitive root to see literally or figuratively. In numerous applications, direct and implied, transitive, intransitive, and causatively. The word saw here, by context, does not mean to see visually, but to know, to perceive, to understand. And I believe that will be verified when we go on down, because you will see on down that their eyes were opened. Well, what were they before? If they were open, they must have been closed before, right? All right. Old Testament, 58:69, and the word is ayin. Probably a primitive word, and eye literally or figuratively. By analogy, a fountain as the eye of the landscape. I believe she saw the image in her mind to know it looked delicious to eat, that was placed there by the wicked one, that they saw by revelation, if you will, that they perceived. They did not physically see. They had the perception that Almighty Yahweh had given them. Then she conspired with the enemy and was tempted by what was offered. She had no problems rejecting it until Satan, he kind of persuaded her. He was a pretty good salesman, wasn't he? He kind of persuaded her to go ahead and take of that fruit, that it was going to be good for her. It was going to make her like Yahweh, to know good and evil. Well, that's partial truth. Whenever she ate the fruit, she was going to know good and evil. She was going to have to choose good and leave evil if she was going to walk with Almighty Yahweh. She was not even tempted to disobey until she stopped and talked to the enemy. There are many today that are doubting Yah's word, saying that there is no fiery pit, and I've heard it over and over again. You think he's going to send somebody to hell? There's no way. The Father loves us too much. He's not going to put us in hell. That's not what the Word says. The Word says He's going to put us there. If we do not walk in obedience to Him, if we aren't His, we're going to be cast out. The devil is telling the same old lie. You surely won't die. You won't burn. You won't burn. There's no way. There is no fiery pit. There's no way that Yahweh is going to send one of His children to the fiery pit. That's right. He's not going to send one of His children. He's going to send the enemies of Yahweh to the fiery pit. Not His children. She saw that the prize was to be desired, and surely they wouldn't die over disobedience. How many times have we heard that attitude today? I won't go to hell for this, or I won't go to hell for that. In all her boldness, she partook of the fruit and enticed her husband to do so. And there's a great pull in a marriage, not only with a wife, but with a husband too. The wife can have a horrible influence on his wife, or a wife can entice and mislead the husband. It's easy to do because you are so emotionally tied. You've become one with your mate. You've become one. And whenever you are at odds with your mate, you're uncomfortable because it's like part of you is missing. And that's what Adam gave into. He gave in to that emotional feeling that whatever happened to Eve, he did not want to leave her. And so he just gave in and took the food too. Eve was deceived. Adam was not. She saw that the prize was to be desired, and surely they wouldn't die over disobedience. So in all of her boldness, she partook of the fruit and enticed her husband to do so. Adam was more loyal to his wife than to Yahweh, and that caused both to disobey. We need to understand. I love my wife, but her relationship with Almighty Yahweh is her relationship. My relationship with Almighty Yahweh is my relationship. And if I'm going to do anything, I want to entice her to get deeper in the Father and not entice her in any way in disobedience or sin. We need to look at our wives and our husbands as a prize. Prize them. And we need to work with them. If we see a weakness, work with them and try to build that weakness up. Try to build up that weakness so that they don't get bit with it. And above all, search out our own weaknesses and make sure that we don't get bit with it. It happens all over today. Our mates are tempted to transgress, to disobey. The Father is not going to send you to hell for that. Stop and think about it. Adam and Eve, they didn't disobey 100 times before they got thrown out. How many times did they disobey? One time. One time disqualified them to stay in the Garden of Eden. Genesis 3:7. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves coverings. Now, if they had been able to see visually before, they would have known that, that they were naked. They had known they didn't have any clothes. But when their eyes were opened, they saw. Before that, I believe they walked so close with Almighty Yahweh that everything that they walked by was by perception, by the guidance of the Ruach HaKodesh. For when their eyes were opened, they saw that they were naked. No longer was evil hid from them, to never be tempted, and to have to choose daily how you're going to walk, how you're going to talk. They had conspired with the enemy, chose not to be loyal to Almighty Yahweh. Maybe not consciously, but by conspiring with the enemy, they made a choice. Whether they knew it or not, they made a choice. When you start conspiring with the devil and trying to justify and figure things out, you've already made the choice. Already. No longer was evil hid from him, to never be tempted or to have to choose every day of their life. We get all bent out of shape when someone plots with the enemy against our country. We get all bent out of shape. I mean, we want to punish them. We want to do everything in the world to them. Kill them. Get rid of them. We get bent out of shape. We don't seem to be aware that when we sin, we have already plotted with the enemy. When we sin, when we transgress, we've already plotted with the enemy. We don't seem to be aware that sin in our life is a betrayal. That it's not something to be lightly looked at. That when we sin in our life, there is a serious charge against us before Almighty Yahweh. A serious charge. Not only they did not, like many of us today, they did not understand the extent of the consequences of their actions. They thought, they did not ever conceive in their mind that the next day they were not going to be able to walk with Almighty Yahweh in the cool of the evening. That concept never hit them until it bit them. Too many times we don't understand that sin keeps us from walking with Almighty Yahweh. It's a fact, people. When you willingly, knowingly sin, you choose to sin, you've regarded iniquity in your heart, and the Father stops, turns his back to you. How many of us want to go through one day with their back turned to them? Did anybody here watch the figure skating events on television the other night? The figure skaters that were contending for the Olympics and all. They were enjoying themselves, basking in their glory, not knowing that less than 24 hours they were going to be in eternity. How many of us go through our life day after day, not even considering that this may be our last day on earth? None of them knew that that was their last day on earth. But it wasn't just the skaters, it was their coaches, it was their parents. All rushed off into eternity. Prepared or not, they rushed off into eternity. There's many people today rushing off into eternity, not prepared, not even looking, understanding that it could be, this day could be your last day on earth. Are you ready? Going to church don't make you ready. Being a church member don't make you ready. You have to be in tune with Almighty Yahweh, walking in covenant with Almighty Yahweh. It is so important that we understand it's our relationship with Almighty Yahweh. It's not our relationship with the church. It's not how much we do for the pastor or how good the pastor thinks we are. They don't have nothing to do with it. If you go before the pastor goes, let me tell you, I'm not going to crawl in the box with you. You're on your own. It's a matter that we have to figure it out. And the Father has given us the Torah for a basic training manual to train us to know how to walk. Many today minimize the seriousness of sin in their lives and disregard righteousness. How many times have you heard somebody say, because we try to keep the commandments and walk in obedience and study the Old Testament, the Torah, and all these things, that we're trying to get there by our own righteousness? We don't have any righteousness. Any righteousness that's in us come from Almighty Yahweh, not us. There is no own righteousness. Everything in us is evil. The carnal mind is at enmity with Almighty Yahweh. Only by the Ruach HaKodesh, only by the love of Almighty Yahweh, do we have any righteousness. And that's because we know and obey the Torah. That's righteousness, people. And because none of us could keep it perfectly enough. How many sins got him cast out of the garden? One. That means one sin laid to your charge keeps you out of eternity. Think about that. One sin laid to your charge keeps you out of eternity with Yah. Yeshua came to take away all of the sins in your life, that you would not have that one sin in your life. And let me tell you something, it grieves him terribly when you go about your life irresponsible and committing sin unconsciously. He suffered horribly on the stake to remove sin from you. And when you just go about sinning unconsciously without any thought of the consequences, you're trampling that precious blood that he shed for you underfoot, treating it as a common thing, not a kadosh thing, not something that cleansed you from sin and took it away. What they did not understand, that conspiring with the enemy and giving in to him, they did not understand the depth of that. They had committed treason against Almighty Yahweh. They had betrayed with treasonous acts against Almighty Yahweh. When we willingly transgress and conspire with the devil, we are committing treason against Almighty Yahweh. Treason against Yeshua, the one who gave his life to cleanse you from sin, that you might enter eternal glory with Almighty Yahweh. When we willingly commit sin, we have already committed treason. 1 Timothy 2:14, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman deceived fell into transgression. Adam had the worst sin. He wasn't deceived. He knew what he was doing. He knew what he was doing and willingly chose to take of the fruit to be with his wife rather than stay faithful to Almighty Yahweh. He wasn't deceived. He made the choice. She was deceived. She didn't realize what the consequences was or how bad it would be. It just, The devil deceived her. She didn't think she would be punished, or she didn't think she would die. Adam wasn't deceived. He knew. He knew the consequences. But like many, possibly he thought that death would come right then. And he didn't want to live without his wife. Very possible. I don't know if that's true. That's a little bit of our theology. But the Word plainly tells us that Eve was deceived, but Adam was not. Therefore, Adam willingly, because of his need to agree with Eve, knowingly partook. We have to see transgression against Yah's laws as high treason against Almighty Yahweh. We may try to excuse it by saying we're just weak, but it's committing treason. An army that in a time of war that would give you a death sentence. You would be executed. We are in a war. We are in an army. Yah's army. We can't come to the Father with a treasonous heart and expect Him to embrace. Where are our loyalties? Where are they tonight? One disobedience excluded Adam and Eve from the garden and walking with Yahweh in the cool of the evening. Are you a good soldier? Or do you have treasonous acts in your life? We need to look carefully at our lives. The works on this earth are of none effect. I guarantee you that the people in that competition have spent their life working on that, trying to be the best figure skater they could be. But the sad thing about it is that none of that will make any difference. Whenever we leave this earth, it's not going to make any difference what somebody else thinks about us. I look at Roger, and I love Roger, and I want him to love me and like me. But if I go before him, it ain't going to make no difference what Roger thinks about me. The difference is going to come because of what the Father thinks about me. And that's what we need to understand tonight. We can have friends all around us here on earth thinking we're the greatest thing on the world. But when that last breath comes, reality comes. All of a sudden, reality is going to hit us right in the face. Right in the face. I live my life today wanting to be able to, when it comes that time that I draw my last breath, I can do it with peace and comfort, knowing that I'm in the Father's hands. That's the way I've got to live my life. And that's the way you should live your life. There's none of us guaranteed a tomorrow. Not any of us. We need to prepare today. If you realize that you have been in a treasonous attitude with the Father, oh, please get it right tonight before you go to sleep. Get it right. We want to walk with Him. We want Him to be our rear guard. We want Him to go before us. He won't do that if we're walking in sin. You make the choice. Whether you realize it or not, you make the choice. When you choose to sin, you choose sin and the devil over Satan. Over Yahweh, I mean. You choose sin and the devil over Yahweh when you choose to sin. And that puts you in trouble, people. That puts you in serious trouble. I know that sometimes people say, Pastor, you preach a hard message. Not as hard as the facts are going to be when we draw our last breath if we're not prepared. You got to get it right, people, and it's the only chance you got. There's not no do-overs. You love Him tonight?